Hi guys, Sam Chiselian here. Welcome to the Lockdown Chronicles 14, and today we're going to talk about China. China, you're going to be hearing a lot more of China over the next 6 to 9 months. This is something that's been going on for a while. There's been a secret war that's been going on for at least 2 or 3 years. I'll give you some of the background to that. Just know that China is really not your friend. You might like eating the food, but you certainly won't like their cultural plans for all of us. Like any communist country, they are incredibly flawed and brutal. And I've worked against a lot of communist countries, like East Germany and former Soviet Union, all of that. So consequently, that's why there are very few communist countries left, is that people in the modern world, it's just incompatible with how they run things. So now you've only got North Korea, China, I think Vietnam, Cuba is communism light. But what you're starting to see now is this upsurge in socialism, which again is communism in a different form, and there are real problems with that. We're seeing the draconian crackdowns, as you saw in the former Soviet Union. You still see it in North Korea, and you have draconian laws. You have a subdued, unarmed populace governed by an elite group of career politicians, the Politburo. No democracy whatsoever, an incredible low value for life. That is socialism and communism all over. Now, what happened is that once upon a time is that we recognized that China was just a country that was there. It was just a communist country. No one really went there. They didn't really come out. There were Chinese populace, all over because they had migrated. But it was only really until the Chinese joined the World Trade Organization that people saw it as an emerging country and then started putting a lot of money into it. So it was really the fault of the West, the greed of Western countries that invested heavily into China, got them to create these special economic zones, which we're now seeing that in Shanghai and all of the trading cities. And at that point, it really opened it up to foreign investment. So we were the ones that actually bought China initially. But of course, being a communist country, they just changed the laws and just took it all back. And we saw this in 1997 when Hong Kong was handed over. China has always had a problem with Taiwan, with a lot of aggression, and we're seeing human rights abuses with the Uyghurs in China, with Tibet. Then the military increase in the South China Sea. So all of that has come about really within the last decade, and I remember when companies from Britain were really looking forward to trading with China, and they're going, wow, we're going to take our I remember one company from Derbyshire, and it had particularly good double glazing, and they said, we're going to take our double glazing. Can you imagine? We got 1.6 billion people to go and sell to. They took their double glazing over there. It was impounded at the airport. The guys were sent back. The Chinese copied it and started their own business. And that's really how a lot of Western businesses have experienced China, with their total disregard for world law, a total disregard for IP, and consequently they're a law unto themselves. And because they are a large nation, and because the West has invested so much in them, now it's difficult to walk it back. Most of the things we actually buy are made in China, and it's our fault. It's the Western consumer's fault demanding cheaper goods. And therefore, that's why if we demand cheap, then we get cheap. And this is why we're getting all this substandard stuff, which is now really coming to the fore after China's problem with the coronavirus, and then trying to offload some of their PPE to us, which is all fake stuff, and it's all really badly manufactured. So We must hold ourselves to account for giving China that foothold into the world, and then creating this marketplace. But there are some interesting parts there. I've got to say, because China is an interesting country, because it's it's the biggest country in the world, and yet it has no innovation whatsoever. It has no, it doesn't make any inventions. The last invention I think the Chinese actually made was gunpowder. So China doesn't invent anything, and that too is a product of Western interference in their country, is that we use them basically as a manufacturing hub. They've got cheap labor, they don't really have too many laws in regards to labor laws, so we can actually get them to make it for pennies, which destroys the infrastructure and the manufacturing in other countries. But what it does do, the product that it does have, is that it means that China doesn't have to invent anything. They don't even make their own cars. They think they're one of the only nations on earth that doesn't actually make its own cars. I mean, even Sweden makes its own cars. So they just make everybody else's. So what it does is it stymies innovation and invention in their country. And it just means that they just copy, which always means that they're behind. Their technology is always going to be behind us, because they are copying our mistakes, and they are copying what we have been making like 5 years previously. So that is the biggest problem with China, because that's all well and good, and China will continue to have that money providing they keep making stuff. But right now, with this coronavirus problem, now we're starting to see China and its true aims. And its true aims is world domination. We're starting to see this militarily. The China are using their money and their influence to going into emerging countries, labeling them with a whole bunch of debt, creating infrastructure and ports, buying up land, buying up businesses. And that's all well and good, providing the money remains. But with the drawdown on the economy after the trade tariffs by Trump, they started seeing a 57% decrease in their economy. So this is a determined attack by the Trump administration to try and rein in China. And I do feel it's going to have benefit for all of us. As we're seeing, China cannot be trusted. We cannot allow all of our pharmaceuticals to continue to be made in China, and that is why we're starting to see laws enacted in Congress to rein that in. I think there is going to be a major backlash. Now, when you start watching the news and you start linking all of these different stories together, so for instance, no one's talking about North Korea right now, but North Korea is central in the China story. Now, no president in living history, apart from Donald Trump, has even talked to North Korea in any real meaningful way. And yet Trump went there, and of course he went there for a specific reason, and not many people know what this reason is. So it was all about China. It had nothing to do with North Korea. They're never a threat to us. Their missiles don't work. They're not really, they're a nuclear nation, in name only. They pose no threat to us whatsoever. They do pose a threat to South Korea, but they're never going to take that on, because America has so many troops there, and we would be able to reinforce that and take out North Korea very, very quickly. However, if you were to look at it from a different perspective, so if you were Donald Trump and you wanted to take out China, you wouldn't look at it from a military point of view. The last thing you want is a war with China. China fights really well when it's being attacked, but it fights really poorly when it's attacking. That's why it lost the war to Vietnam. So if you wanted to counter China's influence, what you do is that you go to Korea. Now, South Korea does have innovation, does have invention. They do make their own cars. They make the Kia, they make LG computers and refrigerators, the Samsung. All of these are Korean companies, and they're very well funded, very well innovated. But what South Korea lacks is people, and it lacks the minerals and the raw resources. Now, go a bit north to North Korea, and it has lots of people, and it has lots of resources. So if you wanted to counter China, what you would actually do is reunite North Korea and South Korea with the promise of keeping the North Korean regime in place in name only, but making it more prosperous. Adding the two together, giving the amount of people that is required for South Korea to really, really blossom, and all the minerals that North Korea has as well. You get those two together, and all of a sudden now you've countered China, because you have an Eastern country with great innovation, with great invention, with a very Western-leaning democracy, well-funded. And at that point, what you then do is then get Vietnam to take on the burden of the manufacturing that China will now lose, and it will lose. So what you're going to start to see in the next 18 months is that China is going to start to reseed. You know, we saw this with the Arab nations. When they had lots of money from oil, they were buying up everything. They're buying hotels, they're buying airports, they're buying, whole countries. As that has now changed, the money is now going back. It's going back to Saudi Arabia, and that's why you're seeing less Arab ownership. You're going to start to see the same thing. So Australia, you're going to start to see either laws enacted by the Australian government forcing the buyback of the stuff that it's sold to China, and that will be enacted into law. There's not much they can do about it. Or you're going to just start seeing a gentle receding of Chinese influence. And we really do need to have that, because the Chinese way is a very cold way, and it all links back to some of the original bloodlines. Okay, so I'll be talking about this in a different video. The three specific bloodlines in the world that are linked into the Illuminati, and the dragon bloodline is obviously linked to the Chinese and the Tongs and the Triads and all of those secret underground organizations, which really run the show. The Chinese communist regime is a puppet regime for these very, very deep but very powerful players. We're seeing a power struggle in the world right now. This is not about a virus. It's rubbish. It's about power. It's about seeing how the populace can be compelled to even take away their own constitutions and their own freedom and their own rights. This is a battle for our minds. This is a battle for our cultures, and it is one that China is actually going to lose. So you're going to start to see a big drawdown of China. I perceive there is going to be a collapse of the economy in China within the next 18 months, and that will lead inevitably to some form of regime change. That's my prophecy. So that's all I wanted to say about China today. I'm going to have another video tomorrow about these lockdowns, about what's really going on behind this, and some of the motivations for what we're now seeing. And there will be a rising, not only in consciousness, but there's going to be a tremendous rising in anger and a rising in action, certainly in the US, later in Australia, and also in the UK. So that's all from me now. This is Simon Trezelyan and Lockdown Chronicles 14, out to you.